Good morning. Let me just get my presentation up. Keynote. Great. So when I was first invited to speak here, I was a bit thrown because I thought, well, I'm the enemy, or at least it seems like it, because my work day in, day out is really to help your best and brightest and most creative people quit your company. So I feel a bit kind of guilty being here, and I thought, well, what can I say that's useful? And I do think there is something useful. And it's that some of the best people you could ever want to hire are reluctant to work for big companies, or in fact, for companies of any kind. They want to work for themselves, and I can tell you why. So I think that's a useful thing to talk about. I can tell you what it looks like from the viewpoint of very talented and valuable people who want to leave large companies or never enter one in the first place. So can I check, is that a useful thing to talk about, first of all? See if I'm not. Okay, good. My evil plan is of interest. Now, I haven't set foot in a company as an employee for almost a decade, so I'm very interested in your opinion on what I'm talking about, and quite happy to make this interactive. I don't claim to know everything because I'm not in your position at all. But here's where I'm coming from. I believe that employers, and large companies in particular, have a problem that's about to get a lot worse. Because we're at a pivotal moment in the history of work, and Alan in his fantastic presentation has already talked about this, but the Industrial Revolution is coming to an end. So just 4 or 5 generations ago, it was very rare to have a job, or no one had a job. I don't know the dates exactly. And then the Industrial Revolution made that the normal way, so that people default to thinking, well, I need to get a job when they come out of school or college. And what's happening is it's starting to swing back the other way. And it's not that noticeable at the moment, but I think it's going to speed up. We're undergoing what entrepreneur Daniel Priestley calls the entrepreneurial revolution. And he has a very interesting quote about this. He says that companies worry a lot about one of their competitors taking a slice of their pie. But what they haven't noticed is that their pie is covered in ants. And you wouldn't believe how difficult it was to find a picture of pie covered in ants. It took hours of research. And what he means by that is that the ants are your employees themselves. So they're leaving and taking tiny piece of your business with you. And this is actually exactly what I did myself when I left Deloitte. So I had a simple plan, which was to actually work less. I'm going to take my watch off so I can keep track of how long I'm talking for. Because I quite like not working. I wanted to do things that were more creative. I didn't want to just sit around. I wanted to do whatever I felt like doing. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll go and approach the same prospects to offer the same thing, but I charge half the Deloitte daily rate, and that would mean I'd still earn twice my salary. So that either means I can get paid a lot of money, or I can take half the year off. And I went and did it, and it took a couple of months to make it happen, and it worked. And in actual fact, I found that I could earn my same amount of money as I did at Deloitte, but in just 3 months of the year, which was nice. And a number of people doing something similar, or at least considering doing it, is growing rapidly. And I'm not just talking about consultants, it's also freelancers, it's people who are content creators, who are online entrepreneurs, the whole gamut of ways that people can make a living without a job. And at the moment, startups currently get most of the press as the alternative to a job. So I'm going to start a company rather than have a job. I'm not so bothered about startups because they're very risky. If you think that the only alternative to a job is to create your own business like that, has staff and investment, and it's a very large project, then that's actually one of the reasons why so many people don't attempt to leave employment. And startups get a lot of press. They're considered very sexy because they represent a new way that a small number of people can have a big impact on the world. And that's an exciting thing. people are less aware of all the other ways. So J.K. Rowling, for instance, had a big impact on the world and didn't need a startup, didn't need a company. So did the couple of Aussie guys who started Movember, if you've heard of that. It started as a bet in a bar in Melbourne, and they said, I bet you won't grow a moustache. And they did, and they then thought, well, how do we legitimize the growing of moustaches? We like this, we want to keep the moustache, but everyone thinks it's horrendous. So they said, I know, we'll do some sort of charity thing. And they looked up what they thought was a really needy cause, and they chose prostate cancer because they felt it was underrepresented. And this thing snowballed into a global movement. It's since then earned £184 million for addressing prostate cancer. It started as a couple of guys having a bet in a bar. So, I'm as excited by those kind of examples as I am about the startups that make it big. And I think a lot of the younger generation coming up now, the digital natives, they know about this. So they don't see a need to go to work in someone else's company in the first place. So in the 20th century, the company was the default way for someone to deliver value and get paid for it. But it's changing. So thanks to the internet, amongst many other factors, as Alan was talking about, you don't need a company. You can put your talents to work with nothing more than a laptop and a mobile phone. So this is me hard at work in Bali, working from a laptop. I know it's tough. And we had Wi-Fi in this house in the middle of a rice field, and I remember we could, myself and my girlfriend at the time, could run our businesses simply with Wi-Fi. In fact, we didn't even use the mobile phone. And a lot of people are in a position where their work can be done remotely, so they can do this, and they don't need anything else. They don't need an office, they don't need staff, they don't need a marketing budget, they don't need investment from others. And that's because the barriers to creating and delivering value are disappearing. So we have direct access to the media now. We can publish our own books, like this infamous example. Don't worry, I'm not going to read from it. We can start our own radio station, we can launch our own TV channel, and we can grow a following organically on social media without having a huge marketing budget or spending a fortune on advertising. And as we've already seen, manufacturing is changing, and I think that's going to be next. So if you can design something in 3D, if you have those kind of skills, and they're getting a lot simpler, you can print a prototype at home on a 3D printer. This is the MakerBot Replicator 2. Has anyone heard of this thing, seen this thing? It's making quite an impact, yeah. So it's quite cheap, it's about £1,500 or less. It's just come out a few months ago. And you can use simple software and design small objects in 3D. It's actually printing something that you couldn't make in injection molding right there in that photo, because it builds it up layer by layer. So this kind of additive process enables you to create things that you couldn't create by conventional plastic molding means. And then once you've had a go at your prototype, you can then upload the same design file to a company you find on Alibaba.com, which is great for outsourcing to China, and they can mass produce the thing you've designed and ship it to people. They can drop ship it to your customers around the world. So this is enormously appealing to the most creative and driven members of the workforce. They can now execute on their ideas immediately, and they don't need anyone's sign-off. But just to be clear, this is not about, I'm not saying that these people are going to take a massive slice of your business. That's not really it. But what it does mean is it presents a problem for staffing. Because if the most innovative and most driven, the people with the greatest initiative go do this stuff instead of joining you, then I think that might be a problem. Now, occasionally, a startup does do something radical, as we all know. So just as Kodak was going bust, in just 2 years, Instagram came from nowhere and became a $1 billion purchase by Facebook. So, that does happen as well sometimes. But to illustrate this, I found something the other day that said that this year at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, an all-time high of 16% of the class of 2011 chose to shun traditional MBA jobs in favor of forming their own startup. More importantly, the 10-year trend data says Poulin Sangvi, director of Stanford's Career Management Center, suggests a generational shift towards entrepreneurship. It's not only showing up on the stats of greater numbers of MBAs launch their own companies, but it's also showing up a number of MBAs who actually to work for smaller companies and startups that are by nature more entrepreneurial. So this is what I see, this is what I deal with every day, people who are realizing that it's more fun to work for themselves and for a small company, even if it's a little bit more risky. And there are more and more of these people expecting something different from their work. I think there are more people who expect to find work enjoyable, creative and varied. They want work that, in my terms, feels more like play, hence the title of my book. It's not really about not working, it's about finding work that's so much fun, you'd do it even if you weren't getting paid. So a lot of the stuff I do now, I'd be doing even if I won the lottery tomorrow. I'd be doing a bit less of it, but you know, I'd still be doing it. So think about what play really means, because I think we've misunderstood this word, and it's an important one. It has a lot of depth to it. Play can be a serious business. It's not what adults imagine, sipping cocktails in a hammock. If you look at a child at play, like this one, it can be a very serious business. And if you think of how you describe the state that she is in, it's things like engaged, excited, creative, flexible, responsive, challenged, in flow. And I think work as its most enjoyable and rewarding is quite like that. And those people who crave work to be like this are not workers, but players in my language. I appreciate there's some negative connotations to the word player. I'm trying to reclaim it, so bear with me. We'll see if we'll get it. It's interesting that there are no negative connotations to the word worker, but there are several to the word player. I wonder how that came about. Is there any chance I can drink water? Yeah, sure. Okay. So let's look at the qualities of a player. And what I mean by that, they're creative, they're intrinsically motivated. That means they do the right thing rather than just trying to look like they're doing the right thing. They're flexible and responsive rather than rigid and passive. They enjoy learning new things. Thanks a lot. They put their personality into their work. They really want to express themselves. They take responsibility for what they're doing. They make the job their own. They are the proactive self-starter of initiative, as the horrible cliche goes. But, you know, that's the reason it's become a cliche is because it's an appealing quality. So what I'm interested in is this a list of attractive attributes for an employee? Perhaps not all of your employees, but you know, for important employees. Am I right, or are you thinking, no, I don't want that? Anyone want to tell me? Yes? Mm. Yeah. Yeah, a bit of gumption. And if we look at people who formed Local Motors and who are involved with Local Motors, from Alan's example, you know, they are what I would call players. They're people who have an idea and want to see the idea happen. And that's not the case in always in employees. I think education seems to be primarily set up to create compliant workers rather than fostering students' creativity, their initiative, their ability to generate ideas, to evaluate those ideas, and then put them into practice and deal with whatever happens. And I think this is because of a mild form of learned helplessness. Has anyone ever heard that term before? So it's a term from Martin Seligman. He did some work 45 years ago. It's a rather unpleasant experiment. It involved giving dogs mild electric shocks. I'm not sure he'd be allowed to do it anymore. Might want to cover your ears if you're a dog lover. But what he did is they took some dogs and gave them mild shocks, and some of the dogs could press a lever and stop the shock and then, you know, walk away. Some of them had exactly the same experience, except they couldn't control it. So the shocks stopped automatically, but they couldn't tell when they were going to happen and they couldn't stop them. And what he found was that the ones who didn't have any control, even though they'd experienced the same level of discomfort, went into a different state for he called learned helplessness. And then when he put those dogs in a situation where they could control the discomfort they're undergoing, they didn't, because they kind of lost their belief that they could change what they were doing. Now, it's a very extreme experience what he mapped out, and you know, it maps to clinical depression. But I think there's a mild form of it that happens in all of us, and that the industrial society has engendered in us, but it's much more subtle, hopefully. So at school, I hope that teachers are not applying electric shocks to your children, but there is something subtle that happens in school and in the education system that does disempower children. So, you know, just taking a child and expecting them to sit still all day is a slight torture, you could argue. And then training them to put up their hand to ask anything. You know, we have to put up the hand to go to the toilet. They need to put up their hand to answer a question. Obviously, that's to enable you to teach them and to keep the class in some kind of order, but it has a cost. And the cost is that you end up with people coming out who don't have that same instinct they do when they're very young, to have an idea and follow through on it. And it makes us passive, and it makes for compliant workers. And I think that's a great shame. And I think that's the problem we're coming up against right now. So we actually need a change in the education system as we move away from the industrial society as well. Despite this, some people seem to retain their playfulness, their drive and their creativity, or they find a way to reclaim it later in life. And that is incredibly valuable. They are not your typical employees. They are, for many conventional corporate environments are not very attractive to them. A lot of my work with individuals, because what I do all day is, I'm interested in the same kind of issues that Alan is, but I work with the individual who's trying to change their life and change their career and get out of a company or start their own or whatever it might be, or write a book for the first time. And the biggest problem I have and the biggest change they have to go through is not learning how to run a business, in actual fact. You can Google that. It's not, you know, you can learn it as you go along. The biggest problem is that they have to change the way they think about life, and they have to undo the learned helplessness that's been engendered with them. So they have to keep thinking, they have to keep remembering, oh, no one's going to tell me what to do next. Oh, no one's going to tell me whether this is the right action or not. I'm just going to have to do it. I'm going to have to try doing this and not know if it's going to work out. And I'm going to have to deal with the consequences. And after about a year, they get it. But actually, a lot of people give up before that. They go back and go back into employment. But if you can get over that, they're changed for good. And in actual fact, they make better employees if they ever go back into employment, because they go in with an entrepreneur's mindset or with a creative person's mindset, going, okay, what really needs to be done here? What should I do today? Never mind reading 1,000 pointless emails. If they don't matter, I'm not going to worry too much about them. So as I say, the problem is that these people, that I call players, are actually kind of turned off by a lot of corporate environments. So here are the things that are a particular problem. They're like kryptonite for players. Oh, hold on a second. Yes, slides are wrong way around. So, actually, no, I'm going to talk about this chap because he's rather interesting. He's a good example. So this guy is Tim Nichols. He's been on a couple of courses of mine. And I'll explain why he's wearing ear defenders in a moment. It's a bit of a strange photo. But he's an interesting example of what I call a player, but I could have chosen all sorts of people. He's very talented. He's really intelligent. He was a behavioral economist. He's had a high-flying career, most recently working for a major credit card company. He's also a maths and programming wizard. He created semantic search software to help a government agency find criminals online. And I've seen that one person like Tim can change the fortunes of a company. Would you agree that one really bright, driven person can make a big difference? They can they can create a new product, solve a really sticky problem, start a whole new service line. The problem is he doesn't want to work for anyone else. And so if you look at what he's doing now, it's a bizarre mix of stuff. He's customized a cutting robot in his garage, and it cuts 3D objects out of wood. So he started doing this for friends, for fun. Very quickly he got noticed and he got asked to make some props for a movie about the Beach Boys, which is coming up. And then that got him interested in someone else at Pinewood Studios who was doing something with Star Wars Academy for Lucasfilm. He started making props for them. This is him at home in his workshop wearing ear defenders because it's incredibly loud when he's got the cutting robot on. He wrote a blog post about the maker movement, about what he's doing, about making things, about people doing hardware projects at home for fun, very geeky people, but you know, people who are very creative and intelligent as well. And it got noticed by The Economist, and The Economist has hired him to write 3 different articles, and he's interviewing one of his favourite authors to do that. And he's continuing to work on his semantic search software as well. So this is what I call a player, incredibly valuable person. And how do you attract someone like Tim into your company if he's reticent to be inside a corporation? Well, as I say, there are some things that are like kryptonite to players. And things like full-time, fixed hours, you know, having no flexibility around this, not much time off, rigid rules from HR telling you what you can and can't do, a lack of clear ethics inside the organisation because these people are values-driven themselves, a salary dependent on title rather than on the value you're providing. So, for instance, a software engineer has to be promoted to management just to get paid more, when in actual fact they make a rather lousy manager, but they're a great software engineer. Restrictive lines of communication, micromanagement, and even IT policy matters. So some people, particularly techie people, will be quite turned off if you force them to use an old laptop. If I had to go into a company and wasn't allowed to use my Mac, I had to use a PC, that would be quite a big problem for me, and it would be for a lot of people. But blocking people's access to Facebook and Twitter and so on, that's a problem. If you're used to sharing your excitement about what you're doing, then that's going to be a major problem as well. So here are some of the things that are attractive to players: freedom, variety, self-determination, support while they're doing what they're doing, part-time work or the options for it, and contracts and freelancing, flexible working and so on, the ability to take sabbaticals. This might sound like a nightmare, I don't know. We'll come to that in a minute. Also, flexibility to define their own role. For some people, attractive workspace design matters. For some, good technology, as I was talking about a while ago. And I just found this acronym on the listing for the conference, BYOD. I had to look it up, bring your own device. And as I say, that solves the problem I would have, but I'd much rather bring in my own device if I was going to work inside a corporation. Also, people want their ideas to be heard, valued and credited, not sort of stolen by someone else or ignored. And they want opportunities for self-expression, to contribute to something meaningful, because it's not just about money. So in actual fact, these people are not always motivated by money as their primary value, which is the good news, possibly. So their motivation is more about self-expression, finding meaning, having autonomy, variety, and enjoying their work. So you might be looking at this list and thinking, well, if I take away all the controls we currently have and we do all these kind of things, well, half our workforce will just do a lot less work. And you might be right. It's not something you can retrofit that easily. It's really about a fundamental change in culture. So these are just presenting symptoms of a change in culture. It's creating culture based on values where you have the belief that if you hire the right people, they will do the right work. And that might take some changing on a fundamental level. So these are things that I believe you need to consider over the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, as things really start to change. Because if you want to keep hold of the most creative and the most driven employees, something's going to have to change fundamentally. Right now, I think the full effect of this movement away from conventional employment is hidden by the terrible economy. So people are very nervous to experiment and to leave a full-time job when things look so bad outside. But the moment we see an uptick, assuming we actually get one, the moment we actually get one, you might see quite a lot of people going, right, this is it, I've been incubating this idea for a while, I'm going to go for it. And then that would be a problem. Because I think we're seeing the beginning of the end of the wage slave, or the passive worker. I think, after all, if someone's work can be simply defined and made repetitive, and it's simple to describe, then if you could outsource that somewhere offshore, you probably would, because that's going to save you some money, you know, if it's not location dependent. If you could automate it, you would. But what we're talking about is the kind of work where you can't outsource it, you can't automate it. It's far more creative and unrepeatable. So I think that as it becomes easier and easier for people to express themselves, to contribute to the world, and to earn money without having a job, employers will need to change in order to make themselves more attractive to the most creative and talented people, who I describe as players. So what do you think of this? We've got 5 minutes, is that right? Yeah. I'm interested in what you think about this, or any questions you've got from my perspective, helping people escape your company.
So thank you very much to John Williams. We're now going to take some questions.
Thank you.
So two assaults on corporate structures, from the mutualism described by Alan Moore, transformation of the group, to the freelancedom described by John, the transformation of the individual. So who'd like to kick off with John, and we can also bring in Alan as well. So, gentleman there.
Hi. Is there a sense in which
Perhaps, if you could tell us who you are. And
yeah, sure. Richard Byatt, Magenta Associates. Is there a sense in which we're in a transition, and that we need these large companies still for these freelancers and entrepreneurs and free spirits to work for? Because in some ways they underpin the economy. A lot of things would have to change if you lost large companies. I mean, anyone who's tried to get a mortgage on a sort of freelance earnings knows that a lot of stuff is built around regular waged work. So is this a marginal shift that will always be underpinned by the large corporations, or do you think it's a?
I think it's small at the moment, and it's going to grow. So I'm not claiming a large company is going to disappear anytime soon, but I think the point is that you might find it difficult to get the people you really want as soon as people see how easy it is to make a living without a job. And I think the kind of stuff that Alan was talking about, to me, just shows that what's happening is people settling to the normal human condition, and technology enables people to return to the way we are naturally. So when people are allowed to connect via social media and other means and do their work and do it in the way they want to, then they're going to, if they can. And if there's a way they can do that they can see is secure, then they will do that. And yes, it's going to take time, but I think we are seeing a shift. It's starting to, you know, as the Industrial Revolution kind of comes to an end, we'll see the swing back the opposite way for more and more self-employment, as the person writing about the MBA students was saying, over the next 10 years.
Okay. More questions, comments from the floor? Yeah, gentleman here, down the front. You wave your hand. That's it.
Thanks. Graham Burns from Cisco Systems.
Hi.
One thing looking at this is I'm interested to understand how this concept would work within the services industry, where you were talking about people making things, thinking about things, but we've got a lot of people in the services industry who don't make anything. So,
oh no, it's not. It's certainly not about people making things. That was just one example. It's also people providing, you know, in the way that I did. I left Deloitte and just provided the same service direct. So there's all sorts of varieties, from making stuff to creating content to providing services. And all those things are getting easier and easier to do directly. There's still advantages to going to a big consultancy sometimes, but the other sector of people doing it on their own, I think, is going to grow more and more.
Okay. Gentleman here, and then we'll go to you at the back here.
Adam Robarts from Robarts Interiors and Architecture in Beijing.
Hi.
Yesterday in the masterclass, we heard a couple of people talk about work-life balance.
Yeah.
But once you take work and make it play, you get play-life balance, which is already balanced, right? So you actually take away the whole problem. I mean, it seems to me that's quite an interesting sort of offshoot of what you're talking about.
It is actually, yes. I mean, work-life balance is not a term I use very much because it assumes that work is something you don't really like very much. I mean, not completely. There's a different challenge that happens when you start really enjoying your work. It becomes easier to overwork because work still, of any kind, still requires focus and attention, and there's only so much of the day that you can do that for before it's tiring. So, you know, but it is easier when you're excited by what you're doing to do too much of it. And so I have to watch that, but I'm not getting carried away. So yeah, it's an interesting question.
Okay, is gentleman there next to Farrell with his hand up? Yeah.
Thank you. Richard Beastall from TP Bennett.
Hi.
Well, I lead a creative organisation, so I'm pleased to say I can recognise a lot of the characteristics in the team at TP Bennett. But I think I agree with much of what you're saying. I think that the challenge for us all is to create a much looser structure around an organisation. And I think that's what's the exciting thing. I don't think an organisation or a company or whatever we want to call it is dead. It's just got to change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the sort of exciting thing of what you're saying. Giving people freedom and allowing creativity and flexibility is what we're trying to do all the time, I think.
Yeah.
Probably not very well, but we could do it a lot better.
And I think that's the way companies will go. So it'll be a variety. You'll have employees, you'll have, I spoke to someone yesterday who's 80% of their consulting team were independent contractors, but working within the organisation. You'll have companies collaborating with tiny little startups who provide services under their brand. There'll be every variation in between. And I think that I'm just suggesting that the more open-minded people are to all that whole spectrum, the better off they'll be. Thanks.
We all seem to be violently agreeing with each other here.
That's boring. I should have said something worse.
No, I think what's interesting is that both presentations talked about intrinsic value-driven motivation, which I think is very important. There was a question there. Somebody had their hand up? Yeah, somebody had a hand up. Just wait for the mic.
Hi, I'm Govinda from Orbit Architects.
Hi.
I was just going to say that I think it's actually already happening, that some companies are actually recognising that and doing that at a smaller level, because I think that shift has already started, and it started some years ago with people like yourself who've already decided that's not for me and I need to work slightly differently. But I also think that over the next 5 years or so, the bigger companies are going to get savvy to this, and people who have sort of opted out will suddenly become very, very attractive, because what they'll do is liven up an organisation that's probably become a bit static and not really moving. So they'll become instrumental in moving that whole system and the bigger corporate world forward. Yeah,
I think so. I think someone who comes back into work from the outside often brings a massive injection of life. And I know I tried to freelance. I mean, I tried to go freelance several times and didn't succeed the first time, and many years ago. I didn't know what I was doing or how to sell myself or what to sell myself as. And it took 6 months to get some work. And then when I ended up going back to a job afterwards, I was changed forever and, you know, much more valuable in my opinion. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I think for this audience, I was particularly encouraged by what you said, the corporate environments, you know, they're kryptonite to a lot of this kind of intrinsically motivated person. But you had attractive workspace design as one of your criteria. And maybe this is an invitation for companies to really start pushing, really start thinking about very alternative 21st century workspaces, really moving away from the old efficiency model. Yeah,
and what I was pleased by is all the people I met yesterday clearly at the cutting edge of employment in every form, HR, technology and structures and so on, properties. And so, you know, this is an audience who wants to be involved with this, which is great.
Time for one more question. There was somebody there. Yeah. Nigel. Yeah.
Nigel Osland at Workplace Unlimited. Most jobs, most work involves a number of roles. So although there may be the bit you do like to do, the playful bit, you still have to market, sell, do your accounts and so on. And I would imagine that burden is higher for the freelancer rather than someone who's part of a large organisation. So, so can we truly enjoy all aspects of work, or can it be play all the time?
No, I don't think so. I think it's not, one long party or anything, but the idea is to change that mix so that the majority of your work is really using your best talents, and you're trying to get other people as much as possible to do the stuff you don't like. So I work with loose collaboration of freelancers, and I have a PA in India, and people who do things on my website and are better at coaching and training, so they run courses with me. And so I don't have to do those things that I don't enjoy and so much and aren't so great at. But yeah, I still have to keep track of my accounts and use Excel, which drives me mad.
So it's not all cocktails in Bali then?
No, unfortunately, only some of it.
Well, on that note, thank you very much indeed to John Williams.
Thank you.